So I'm Catherine Stevens. I direct the grants program at Mass Humanities, and I'm working with Mary Jenkins on the SHARP grants program. Let's advance the slide. Okay, so this webinar is being recorded and will be available after today. We will send you information about how to access the webinar, and we'll also provide the slides. So feel free to add questions in the chat, as I mentioned, as we go through the presentation. And we'll answer those questions at the end. I'll try to collect ones that are common. If there are ones that we can't answer, we encourage you to email Mary Jenkins. And if you aren't able to use the chat, at the end, we'll also provide an opportunity for you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. You can advance the slide. So Mass Humanities, as you know, is the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which we have been since 1974. We create opportunities for the people of Massachusetts to improve their lives.
Okay, I'm going to finish Catherine's sentence for her, since her computer is frozen again, to improve their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. So the Mass Humanities receives major support from the National Endowment for the Arts here and the Massachusetts Cultural Council, as well as generous private donors. It's a private 501c3 nonprofit organization. Mass Humanities, Catherine, is committed to, and you're back on.
Okay, great. So Mass Humanities is committed to responsible stewardship of public and private resources through the guidance of our statewide board of directors and our creative and efficient staff. So we serve the state from Adams to Provincetown, from Springfield to Boston, and everywhere in between. And we help people celebrate their stories, reflect on issues in their neighborhoods, and imagine a future for themselves and their families. So this webinar is about the SHARP program, that is the Sustaining the Humanities Through the American Rescue Plan, or SHARP grants. So they're designed to provide operating support to Massachusetts humanities organizations as they prepare for, respond to, and recover from the effects of the coronavirus on their organizations and on their communities. So funding for the SHARP grants is provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan. The SHARP awards, you can apply for up to $20,000 in funding. There is one category within the application that is capped at $5,000, but your entire application can total up to $20,000. Mary will explain a little bit more about that category when we get into the application process itself. Successful applicants will receive approximately 1-year grant. So for activities that take place from October 1st to December 1st, 2021 to 2022. With the anticipated large number of applications, Mass Humanities may make partial grant awards. The timeline for this application is, the applications are live now. So if you go to our website, and Mary will show this a little bit more, you can access that application from our About Grants page, from the Apply buttons. The deadline for final applications is Wednesday, August 4th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Of course, we always recommend that you don't wait till that late, but that is the final deadline. Notification of grant awards will be in mid-September 2021.
So this is the definition that the National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities defined in 1965, and it remains pretty much the same today. So in reading this, and you'll find this in the guidelines as well, you should be able to recognize the work that you're doing and your organization in it. To be eligible for a grant through the SHARP program, you must focus on, your organization must focus on the humanities. And this is a stipulation that's been put in place by the National Endowment for the Arts. I would absolutely encourage you to become very familiar with the guidelines before you start your application, to make sure that this is a fit for you, and it's worth your taking the time to submit an application. So aside from being a humanities organization, there are certain other stipulations, including you have to be a 501c3 non-profit tax-exempt organization based in Massachusetts, or a federally recognized tribe based in Massachusetts. And you must have a DUNS number. So the National Endowment for the Humanities requires all the recipients of grant funding to have a DUNS number, which is known also as a Data Universal Number System. If you don't have a number, you can go to irs.gov and enter DUNS number in the search engine, and it will tell you how to go about applying for one, and it will also actually provide you with the opportunity to find your DUNS number in case you've lost it. Getting a DUNS number is free of charge. If you come across any websites or organizations offering to find your DUNS number and charging you a fee, it's a scam and probably illegal. So irs.gov is your go-to place. We know that it takes a while to get a DUNS number. So if you're in doubt about this, you need to get on it right away. It can take more than 2 weeks to receive a number. And if you have any trouble with this, please get in contact with me. Ineligible organizations in this round is the National Endowment for Humanities also placed limits on the type of organization that is eligible for funding in this round. And this includes for-profit entities, municipal entities, or government agencies. The exception is for libraries, who may apply, but only through their 501c3 support group or friends group. University colleges and academic departments are not eligible. Organizations whose mission and programs is the creation or performance of art, that's the majority of the programming, excuse me. Political or advocacy organizations, unincorporated associations, fiscally sponsored organizations, individuals, and foreign organizations. And then there are always prohibited expenses that you should not submit as part of your budget, even an explanation. Any travel, either in this country or elsewhere, any pre-grant award costs incurred before October 1st, 2021, you're submitting a budget, a future budget, not a past budget. Any cancellation costs that have been incurred because of the pandemic, any competitive re-granting is also prohibited. Fundraising activities of any kind. Equipment costs that exceed 20% of the total grant request. So for instance, if you were submitting a grant for $2,000 and you had equipment costs of $400, you could only submit $200 of that. I think if that's, and if the math's wrong, you can send me nasty comments in chat. Any construction costs, purchase of real estate, major alteration, any renovations or environmental sustainability improvements are also prohibited. Collections acquisition is also prohibited. And I want you to pay particular attention to this first bullet point here, which is overlapping program or project costs with any other pending or approved applications for federal funding and or mass humanities project-based grants. So if you've been applying for funding elsewhere, or for instance, you have a PPP grant and that period of time hasn't expired, make sure that when you submit the budget to us, you're not submitting, if you like, costs that you are going to be picked up within another grant. Promotion of any particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, it's also prohibited. Advocacy of a particular program, support of specific public policies or legislation, lobbying, and I think this was mentioned before, the creation of performance of art or performing arts. The other, one other caveat is that if you're a small organization with a small budget, you cannot apply for more than, if you're applying for $20,000, your budget, your organizational budget must be, cannot be less than 50% of the money that you're applying for. And as I say, if you've got any questions about any of these details, you should feel free to get in contact with me. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of actually how you go about doing this. So the application components are, the application is completely online. You don't have to mail us anything here. We've tried to keep this as streamlined as possible. There is data that you will need to collect. So there's some homework to do before you get into writing the application. There are several sections. We're asking you for information about your organization's mission and program. We're also asking you about what's happened to you over the period of time, over the pandemic period. So we ask for data points on what happened to your finances, what's happened to your staffing in particular. We ask you about the plan of action for the use of the grant funds that you're applying for. And we also ask you for a budget outlining how you're going to use the money. A couple of things you need to upload into the application are proof of your organization's 501c3 status. And this can simply be your IRS determination letter, which I hope you've got on file. It can also be a PDF copy confirming that you were listed on the IRS's tax-exempt organization list. If you cannot, for whatever reason, find your IRS determination letter, or you fall into the tax-exempt, on that tax-exempt organization list. And the second upload that you need to do is your recent financials. And that's the most recent complete year for your financials. What we want you to do is upload a PDF copy of either your 990 or your 990 EZ or your 990N. If you're submitting a 990N, then you would need to provide a separate sheet itemizing what your expenses have been, collapse that with the 990 and upload them all together. So when we surveyed constituents, when we knew we had the funding in play, to try to get a sense of what it was you were mostly struggling with. And there were some key things that stepped out here. And what we tried to do in designing this program is to target it in the areas that you told us you were under the most stress around. So this is revenue, staffing, rebuilding audiences, training, and organizational capacity. You can apply for funding across all of the 5 areas. If you decide you want to apply for $20,000, you could put it in any one of these buckets and divide it up depending on what it is you want to do. Or you could say, I want to focus this entire application on staffing, and I'm just going to apply in that particular area, and that's absolutely fine. Or you could choose a couple of areas. It's entirely up to you to determine what your greatest need is at this point in time. In the application, you'll be asked to explain what your needs are and what, as I said, what your plans are for the use of the funds. So just to run through these areas in a little more detail, the idea behind revenue is to help you restore operations. And we know for many of you, this is not going to be nearly enough money, but it's a step, and we hope that it's a step in the right direction. Its expenses in this category can include basic operating and maintenance costs, literally keeping your doors open and keeping the lights on. It could also involve changes in the way and the type of programming that you're now doing as a result of the pandemic, and also, adjustments that you've had to make as an organization as you reopen to the public. On staffing, this is either to maintain, re-employ, replace, or hire new full or part-time positions in your organization, and or increase diversity in your staff. So this could be I want to point out here, if this was, you needed to bring on new staff with a particular goal in mind, this is ineligible. This is quite eligible. In the same way, if you are, if you've reduced the amount of hours, for instance, that staff is working, and you want to go back to bringing them back to sort of close to a full-time position, you could apply for that. So you might want to think about what you want to do in that area. One of the things you told us, that rebuilding audiences and how to go about doing it is really key. Many of you have been either shuttered or operating at less than 100%. So this is an opportunity for you to think about how to re-engage the communities your organization serves, develop relationships with new audiences. You might have discovered that you've got people who are interested in your work that turned up on your doorstep during the pandemic that unexpectedly, and also to reposition your organization in response to the effects of the pandemic. So this could be community outreach. It could be redefining your organization's public profile. There may be something you want to do. It could also be expenses for the cost of advertising and digital and print marketing. So this is a pretty broad category. For training, this is intended to develop and increase staff awareness and capability. So for instance, if you wanted to improve your customer face, you know, your customer service end of your organization, or you see there's a need to develop a different way of staff greeting or working with audiences, this is one of the if the concern is increasing their sensitivity in certain areas, this is the bucket, the area that you would use. It can include equity, inclusion, and diversity procedures and policies. This covers online training programs, as well as in-person training programs in any area of your operation. So it would involve trainer costs, educational classes, off-site development training, or certification programs for any of your staff. Just note here that travel costs aren't allowed. That's one of the prohibited expenses. Organizational capacity, as we mentioned earlier, the cap on this category is limited to $5,000. And this is aimed at rebuilding your organization's capacity to resolve or respond to issues faced during the coronavirus, which, you know, faced with reopening, you now really want to tackle. This kind of work is typically done with an external advisor or expert, but doesn't have to be. So this is a good choice if your organization is uncertain about the next steps to take for recovery, and you want a clearer understanding of your organization's needs and issues before carrying out changes. So the kinds of activities that we would support in this area would be an assessment of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access efforts, financial stability, if you need to do some analysis around what's going on with you financially, or what your future finances are likely to look like. Strategic, and you need the assistance of somebody, an expert, to do it. Strategic planning, you may want to revise your strategic plan or revamp it entirely based on things you've discovered about yourselves as an organization. Governance, policies, and procedures may need to be updated or changed at this point in time. Program evaluations, so you have a good sense of actually whether or not your programs are doing what you intended to do at this period of time, or figure out a way to be able to adopt some methodology that's really going to be useful to you, and research and analysis of any area that you think would benefit you as an organization. Just note that organizational capacity funds are not intended to support staff positions. Go back to the staffing area to apply for funds in that category. So after the application deadline on August 4th, we review all of the applications for eligibility and appropriateness. So that means that we are looking to see that you meet the criteria And ineligible applications are removed from consideration by the panel of experts that we bring together who have experience in the humanities. It includes members of the Mass Humanities Board and people from the state who have considerable experience in humanities organizations. So during the review process, applications are scored according to the criteria that we've laid out, which mirrors both the guidelines and the application that you're applying for. Based on the panel's recommendation, the Mass Humanities Executive Committee will make all final award decisions. There are 4 areas that are primarily focused on when it comes to evaluating the applications based on the criteria, and they are the relevance and mission of the relevance of your mission and your programs to the humanities, an explanation of why you need the money, your plan for the use of the money, and then a budget outlining what it is, what the money is. So, and those are the 4 areas that will be evaluated. If you are successful at getting a grant, you're going to be required to submit a final report by December 30th, 2022. The report will consist of financial documentation and highlights of the project's activities over the funding period. And this is information that we send back to the National Endowment for the Humanities at their request. So you can visit our website to find staff contacts for Mass Humanities. The guidelines are posted on our website, and you can access the online application for SHARP on the website too. To get started, as I mentioned, the application is completely online, and this can be, even for the most experienced grant writers or anyone who's completed grant before, this can always be a bit daunting, but it's actually very logical. So the first thing I would say, did I say read the guidelines earlier? Well, read the guidelines before you get into this space. So, and when you click on the link in the guidelines to open the program, this is the page you'll arrive at. And what you want to do is you'll see that big yellow, there's a big yellow sort of look here, which is log on, create an account to apply. And when you click on that blue button, you'll end up on this page. And then if you know your login information from past applications, go ahead and log in. Make a note of your login email address and password and share it with a colleague. I can't tell you how many times people lose the information or something happens and then the person writing the grant isn't available and someone else has to pick it up and they just don't have the login information. So share it around, so you don't need to keep this to yourself. If you don't have an account and you know you don't have an account, then you can create one. And again, you remember to save your email and password for future reference. You'll, in order to access the online part of the application, you'll create, when you go through this page, you'll create an organizational profile. If you forgot your password, there's a little, you'll see underneath where it says login and create new account, it says forgot your password. And you can use that to reset your password. And then of course, you're going to write down what that password is. And if you continue having trouble logging on, you can get in contact with me and I'll do my best to help you. So the next thing when you get into the whole thing and you've got your login sorted out, what you're going to come up against is this, which is a list of, these are the sections that you're going to fill in. And they look, it looks like a lot, but actually some of them are very brief. You'll be able to use the arrow to the side of each of these sections to open it up to access that particular portion of the application. The work does auto-save, yes, as you put the work in, and I think it auto-saves every 100 characters or something like that. So don't worry overly much that you're going to all of a sudden lose your work if you close it out. You can close it out and you can come back to it. So, but I would review all of the sections before you actually begin the grant, because this will give you an idea of what it is you have to complete and also what information you need to gather. It will make it much faster for you if you do the information gathering before you begin to enter into here. It will be much less frustrating. So throughout the application, we have scattered some tips for completing the application. We've tried to make this as simple as possible, and we'll ask you for your feedback after the fact about that. But as we have said, review the application well ahead of the deadline. I always like to say, well, okay, if the deadline, in this case, the deadline is August 4th, but I plan on completing it by August 2nd. So, you know, you are not going to be scrambling at the last minute. You know, the witching hour is 11:59 on August 4th, and I would hate to see anybody miss that deadline because they just are kind of working against the clock. So as I mentioned, preparing your answers and doing the required uploads would be the first step that I would take in gathering the materials you need to complete it. If you're not confident about writing the narrative sections directly into the application, I would suggest that you write them in Word, particularly if you have to share them with other people for edits and what have you. So, and you can write and edit in Word and cut and paste it into the application. But before you write, pay attention to the character limit that's in each of the sections. We try to give you enough room to be able to provide a good, well-defined rationale for what it is you're going to be doing. So, and the room to be able to explain yourselves. So we're hoping you're not going to have too many difficulties. One thing I would say is check your budget figures, as they don't automatically add up, unfortunately. So when you put your budget figures in and when you provide your explanation, we ask you for a breakdown of those budget figures. Make sure, go back and double check what you're doing. And one note I would add is that the grant request and the total budget are meant to be the same. So if you're applying for $20,000 as a grant request, then your budget figure should be $20,000. So they should be the same. If you've got any questions at all, I'm here to help. So please feel free to get in contact with me. There's no question, you know, you don't have to second guess yourselves. You can get in contact with me and I'll respond as soon as I possibly can. And this is my email address, mjenkins@masshumanities.org. So what we're going to do now, this is the end of the sort of PowerPoint part of this. So I'm going to close out of this and we're going to focus now on answering the questions you may have put in chat. If you've got a question right now and you want to just put it in chat while we're moving through this bit, we're going to go through these questions first and then we'll see whether or not we have time to open it up. We've got about half an hour. We are going to stop at noon. If we run out of questions, we'll stop earlier. You can come and go as you like. You've got enough information from this, but if you want to stay on and listen into what other people are saying, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thanks everyone who's been putting questions in the chat. So I'm going to reopen that so I have it on my screen. So one of the questions we received was, does the grant work have to take place over the full year, or could it be shorter, you know, a 6 months use of funds?
We're anticipating awarding a grant that's going to cover the year. So I think it's worth thinking through your timeline for the use of funds. I think it sort of depends on what you're going to do. I mean, obviously, if you're going to hire somebody and you're going to spend that money down over the course of the year, then that makes absolute sense. If you were going to apply for in the organizational capacity and you were going to wrap up your training within a 6-month window, I don't think we would say, that would knock you out of the running. I think there are other sort of more pertinent eligibility issues that you need to check in. Most importantly, that you're spending the money, you're not spending the money, you are spending the money appropriately, and that you're documenting what you're doing during the grant period. Because if you're only using it for 6 months, and the report is due at the end of December 2022, sometimes you can forget actually what you did. So I think it certainly wouldn't knock you out of the running, but you'd have to make the case for it, just like any other application. It's like, this is our timeline and this is why. This is our timeline for this particular activity.
Yeah, I agree. I think you are welcome to use the grant funds over the period that you need, and in the application, it's really about making the case for the need and the timeline. We had a couple other questions like that. Do we preference all of the funds in one bucket or across all? And again, there it really is being able to make the case for whether you need funds in each category, or whether it makes sense for you to focus. And so it really is the case making within the application that matters the most to reviewers in mass humanities. We don't privilege or prioritize any bucket over another, or a focus versus spread all the way across. If you have questions about your eligibility, I've seen a couple in relationship to the humanities for organizations that maybe do some arts programming. That's a great question to ask over email. So we'll, in the guidelines, you'll see that definition of the humanities. We have it in these webinar slides as well. So I think that's often a question that requires a little bit of a conversation about your organization. And so that's definitely one I would recommend that you email Mary for some information about.
Catherine, I can also see a question about publicity guidelines. Mm-hmm. And they're most likely to be the same. If you do get a grant, you'll be sent an agreement, and along with that agreement will come the publicity requirements and credits that are needed. So that will be something that will be sort of given to you. But pretty much, it's about, usually it's about crediting Mass Humanities and also crediting the National Endowment for the Humanities. And generally the Mass Cultural Council is in there somewhere too. So if you've, but all of that information will come to you with your grant agreement.
I see a question too about someone who has a digital capacity grant currently and whether they can apply for SHARP funds as well. So the answer is you can apply for SHARP funds, but not for something for which you have received digital capacity grant funds. So that would be, if you were to apply for SHARP funds for something you've already received an award for, that would be that double funding in a single line. You can apply for SHARP funds for other things.
And that goes with any of the grants that you're using currently for Mass Humanities, so that you're not overlapping expenses in one grant into another, that these are new costs for you, which is the best way probably to think about it.
So I'm looking for some other questions, and Mary, if you see ones that we haven't answered yet, feel free to jump in on them.
We do, in the application, we do ask you to identify primarily, I mean, obviously we understand very well that all the organizations in the humanities and the arts have been incredibly stressed over this last 18-month plus period. And what we decided was to focus this program on what you're heading into rather than what you have experienced. So the grant application doesn't overly focus, if you like, on the effects of the pandemic, except that we do ask for information about your finances and we ask for information about staffing. And we ask you to identify what your greatest need is now and why. And that's probably the space where you get an opportunity to talk about what's happened briefly in your organization.
The question about fundraising activities, which is it's a good one and an important one, which is, could the staffing area be used to hire someone who is in a development or marketing position versus funding fundraising activities?
So another question was, does this program differ from grants offered last fall? And that this person said they didn't apply last time, but found it helpful to look at past awarded projects. I think I would say just focus on the guidelines and the application itself. In this instance, this program is different enough to not make it incredibly useful to look back at what has been awarded by Mass Humanities in the past. The grant program is designed very differently. When the CARES money was offered, it was a very, very simple application responding to, the incredible panic that was going on at the time. When you think this was last March, the panic at the time that was going on, and nobody knew what was happening next. And Mass Humanities did a fantastic job at responding to that. This is a little different. This is really to help you with thinking through actually what it's going to take for you to move toward recovery in light of what's happened.
So with regard to the fundraising question, having a staff person whose role is marketing and thinking about development is fundable, but actual activities, fundraising events, direct fundraising outreach is not an eligible expense.
There's another question here about that the shutdown actually opened opportunities to reach membership in new ways. And if you want to continue to kind of do that work, as long as you're not applying for overlapping expenses that you've received elsewhere, then absolutely you would. This is a section that's about the focus area that's called rebuilding audiences. So that if you found that you need to go about doing things in a different way, maybe you want to think about sort of applying in that category to cover some of the new things that you're doing. We do ask you for your total audience figures, and that includes both virtual and in person for the past year. Okay, and somebody asked a question about who the advisor could be for organizational capacity. That's entirely up to you. You can select your own consultant or advisor in any of the categories that you think. So if you've got someone in mind that you'd like to be working with, or you want to go out and find somebody, you can absolutely elect to do that. We do not, we're not going to, it's entirely up to you. And if that's not an area that you're very familiar with in terms of how to go about finding somebody, feel free to get in contact with me. I'm happy to discuss that with you. If you decide to do the work internally, then I think that's okay, as long as you've got a plan for how to do it. And I think that's worth explaining in the application. You need to make mention of that in the application, so it's clear what you're up to.
And we have a question about if you have contracted with somebody currently, but the work is taking place over the grant period, is that an eligible expense? That's a very nitty-gritty, complex question. What we have said is if the work takes place during the grant period, so the money is going for work taking place during the grant period, that's an eligible expense. But if you are paying, but you cannot pay someone for work you're contracting with now that happens now, right, before the grant period actually starts. So paying attention to those timelines and being clear about that, if necessary, in the application is important.
Yes, so the clock starts ticking August 1st, 2021. That's when your budget starts. Oh, that's when your activities start.
September, mid-September. Sorry, October 1st.
Sorry.
Our timeline. So October 1st is when you can start using funds. So you'll learn about the award in mid-September. We wanted to keep that date open. So that allows us to then say October 1st is when you can start using the funds for any activities And if you've already contracted with someone, if you're paying them for that time that takes place after that October 1st deadline, that's okay. That's allowable.
So, Catherine, another question I've got is how many awards will be given?
So as we've said, we expect a high number of applications, and our intention is always to try to fund as many organizations at a sustainable and useful amount as possible. So we don't have a set number of awards, and our intention is to fund widely across the state, to fund, we are open to funding organizations of all size, but to also make sure that we as the State Humanities Council, who does serve the smallest and most vulnerable organizations, do put an emphasis on funding those organizations. There isn't a set number. For the CARES Act grants, we funded 123 organizations, so it's possible to fund that many this time.
Are there any other questions here that I don't think we've answered? Does anybody else want to put a question in chat? Or it's 11:45, so we could open this up. If you're not able
to put a question in the chat, if you want to voice a question, and again, if we're not able to directly answer it in this webinar, because some questions are complex and it takes some thinking through, please email us. So if anyone would like to unmute, please go ahead.
The questions come up again. Are organizations ineligible if they don't focus solely on the humanities? Your programming must, your mission and your programs must focus primarily on the humanities. So that's the rule of thumb. It's not we do 50% of this and then we do 50% of the humanities. It's really, on balance, it's that this money is intended for humanities organizations. So that's where the focus is for this funding.
It looks like Susanna Carley has a hand raised. Are you able to speak? Yeah, great. I can hear you.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Just wanted to ask a question. Could we go back for a moment just to the comment that was made about the budget ratio? You mentioned a figure of less than 50% of the annual budget for the request. Could we just go back over that particular guideline for a moment and with maybe a little bit more explanation? I want to make sure my organization aligns. Thank you.
So just to give you for instance, if you apply for $10,000, your budget needs to be, the rule of thumb is your budget can't be less than 50% of the grant requests that you're applying for. So if you're a really small organization with a budget of $5,000, you really should only cap the grant request in relation to that particular category. So there's information about this in the guidelines, so I would suggest you review that and come back to me if you've got any other questions.
Yeah, that applies to really the very smallest organizations. So that would be organizations typically filing the 990N, so under $50,000. So it's really specific to that. There was a question about demonstrating the direct effects of the pandemic versus indirectly how it might have delayed plans or efforts you had underway. Again, that I think is in the application. That's really where you are making your explanation of need. So if the pandemic forced you to do things to delay things that are necessary for your recovery back into a semi-reopened and altered world, you can make that case in the application. That's what I would recommend doing.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going through to see whether or not we've missed anybody else. Is there anyone else who has a question that they want to unmute and you can speak out? It's fine to do it.
I was just wondering if you could please repost the slide with the definition of humanities.
I can.
Absolutely. And we will send out with information for how to access this webinar once it goes up on our YouTube. We'll also send out the slides, and that definition is in our guidelines as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about this, just be back with you. There we go. Okay. Oh, yeah,
Also,
well, I
if you
can-
get into the application, you will also see that definition there. So you can look at that definition when you go to explain your mission and your programs, and make sure that your mission and your programs really do match that understanding of the humanities from the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Sorry about this. There's the definition for you.
And it looks like Catherine has a question, Catherine Ostrovsky.
Hi, yes. We're looking into purchasing air filters to allow more patrons to be in our space. And I was wondering if that kind of a thing would fall under equipment and be eligible, or if it would be like building renovations and not be eligible.
That's a great question. And I think we should probably follow up on that and make sure that we're following the federal guidelines around that kind of upgrade, which
Okay.
clearly is related to the pandemic.
Usually the rule of thumb is for the IRS is that something, a piece of equipment can be depreciated over a 3-year window. It totally depends on the cost, but you are limited by, with equipment, of only being able to spend up to 20% of the funds. 20% of your grant request can be spent on equipment. That's it. So it's you're bringing up something important, but I would sort of say balance it out. It's almost like getting everything on the table and then figuring out really what the priority is going forward. And sometimes it's interesting what emerges when you do that, and to have some conversation with the rest of the staff about what they think are also priorities too. Sometimes the thing at the bottom of a list is oftentimes the most important thing that needs to be tackled. So in terms of the issues that you're dealing with, and some of them are very practical issues, how would you sort of line them up? And what is it that needs to be done to put your best foot forward at this point in time?
Looks like there's a question from, oh, sorry. It looks like there's a question from Joseph Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I see a hand raised. Were you trying to ask a question?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we were looking to start a podcast. And then once the pandemic hit, we just kind of closed down. And now we're like, oh my gosh, this is more important now than ever. And it seems as though that's a part of what the SHARP grant would cover. But I just wanted to make sure for like equipment, we'd have to bring someone in, yada, yada. Is that right?
I don't know whether or not you clear the eligibility criteria in terms of who you are as an organization.
We're a historical and a historical society, publishing house.
Got it. Yeah. So what you're talking about is that, and we mentioned this earlier, you're talking about a change in terms of the way you go about doing programming. So as such, that I think would be an eligible expense. But we can also touch base on this offline if you like, if you want to email me. And
Okay.
I can hear from you, since it's such a specific question. We can have more of a conversation about it. So
Okay.
feel free to email me. And I just want to bring up. I'm just going to bring back my email address for everybody, so that you know how to reach me. And as I said earlier, there is no question that, however small, certainly once you get into the application process, if you get caught short, or you don't understand quite what we're intending you to do in terms of the application, we won't read drafts of anything, but we will, we will provide you with as advice as we can about what you should do. Up to you how you position what it is you're going to be doing. So
the important part of the positioning is that what you are seeking is something that responds to an impact of the pandemic on your organization or your community, and is part of recovering your organization and your community. So really trying to hit those two elements in the use of funds, right? So that you can explain the need in those ways, and that the use then matches those needs.
I mean, for many of you, you are only just really getting back on your feet, or beginning to think about, how you're going to go about doing what you do. All of us are, there's certainly some experimentation that's going on as a result. And that kind of experimentation is okay. And as I said, this funding is about recovering from the pandemic. So if there are action steps you need to take around these areas that we've identified that would be that are in line with the intent behind the program, then bring it on. That makes sense. Any other questions at this point? We're nearly out of time for today. As Catherine said, we are going to share this PowerPoint with you. That means that you can share it with other staff people and give them an opportunity to then you'll get an opportunity to sort of noodle about what you think you might want to do. Okay, I'm just going to put one last call for questions. And I think we're going to kind of end it there. We're delighted that you were able to take the time today. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. We hope that you and your communities and organization are in as good a shape as you possibly can be, based on actually what the nightmare that's happened for so many people. We're greatly encouraged by the fact that this money is available at this point in time. We're aware that it's not nearly enough money, but it's a step in the right direction. So thank you so much for your work. Catherine.
Thank you, Mary. And again, thank you for everyone for coming. You've said it's been a really difficult and stressful time for humanities organizations, but we also know that you have been doing fantastic work really throughout these past 18 months. And so we hope that these funds will allow you to continue that work, to build back and to recover. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing your applications.